speak through me tonight, and that I get out of your way, and that we can learn how to be the men that you designed us to be, the leaders that you designed us to be, and follow your example. Thank you, Lord, for your Spirit that guides us, and help us to do your will each day. Thank you for your Son and your forgiveness when we don't. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, so first of all, I apologize for the handout. There's a typo. The very first line is not shepherd, it's shepherd. So Phil helped me out. This is the book I'm going to be teaching from tonight. I highly recommend it. I'm going to try to cover the whole book in about 35-40 minutes. So that's not going to happen, but I'm going to do my best. It's a good book, and we're going to kind of jump right in. I found out that I was teaching on Sunday morning, so I didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare. But this is a good book. Kevin Peters actually recommended this to me when we're getting this class going. So this is what we're learning about tonight, the way of the shepherd. So first of all, I want to share a little bit about kind of my personal journey with this. I brought some visual aids. I don't have a slideshow, but I do have some visual aids. So this is a katana, samurai sword. Several weeks ago, a month ago, whenever, I taught about the way of the warrior, Bushido, the samurai. So this is a samurai sword. It got me collecting swords, and I love swords. I had this for a lot of years. It is actually a good quality, real sword. It doesn't have a sharp edge on it. But I have it hanging in my office, and it's kind of a relic to remind me that I am a samurai, that I am a servant. I'm supposed to serve people and protect them. So that was kind of my first journey into the sword collecting realm. And then I had my own business for a while, and I had an employee who was from Nepal. And he was telling me about this weapon that the Nepali soldiers used and how they were never conquered by any other nation. And the little Nepali men would get up in the mountains and hide from people, and then the English would come walking through or whoever, and the Nepali men would take this thing, it's called a kukri, and it's for slashing, and they would jump down out of the rocks and they would just gut them from, the middle up. And so this is to remind me of Binod, my employee, and the Nepali soldiers. So these are two really prized relics within my collection. My stepfather collected swords, and when he passed away, he passed them down to me. So I have lots of really cool relics in my collection. Those are two that mean a lot to me for a certain reason. Well, this is my latest one, and this is a shepherd's staff. So we'll talk a little bit about the shepherd's staff and what it's used for. It's actually a walking stick version of it. But it's not just used for a walking stick, and we'll get to that. It can be used to direct the sheep, to comfort the sheep, and to extend the reach of the shepherd and rescue the sheep. So this reminds me that I need to be a good shepherd to the people that I lead. So little visual aids there. So let's start with the scripture, Psalm chapter 23. So I'm going to start by reading that. You guys probably know it by heart. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So, most of what this psalm talks about is what we're going to talk about today, tonight, in regards to the shepherd. So this book is written in kind of the modern day parable, it talks about leading sheep, and how leading sheep as a shepherd is a lot like leading people. So the first thing, there's basically 7 secrets that it talks about, and they're on your handout here. So we're just kind of going to go through these, hopefully quickly, and we can have some discussion about it too. So the first secret is to know the condition of your flock. So it talks about how it's important to know the people, or the flock, the sheep, to know every one of them, to know them by name, to know where they're weak, where they, what's going on with them, and to know what condition they're in. So that goes to when you're leading people too. It's very important to know the condition of the flock that you're leading. It says that we should follow the status of the people as well as the status of the work. So we need to know what's going on with them, and on a daily basis, on a continuing basis. One of the things that I've experienced throughout my years with some of the leaders that aren't good shepherds is that they get very disconnected with their flock, and they don't know what's going on. And I've heard it said, heard people say, the further up you go in a company, the less the person knows about what's really going on. So I got some amens there. That's very true. And so it says, you got to get to know your flock, and that happens one sheep at a time. You've got to take personal time with each person that you're leading, and you got to know them and know what's going on with them, so that you can engage with your people on a regular basis, and you've got to keep your eyes and ears open about what's going on all around, and what's going on with them, and question and follow through. I'll tell a story here. I had an employee one time, and it was not going well. I was ready to fire him. He was not producing the work that I expected, but I was just really frustrated. And I had given hints, but I hadn't really sat down with him and talked to him about it. And I knew that was coming, and I was dreading it. So I had a one-on-one with him, and I just got real frank with him, and I'm like, hey, what is going on? You're just not performing to the level that I'm expecting you to perform at. You're a senior level person, and I'm expecting senior level work. But lately, things have been off. Something's been going on, and it's just not what I expected. So I paused, and I just let him respond, and he kind of teared up. And I was like, what is going on? Did I just break his heart, And he was like, he got him to regain his composure, and he was like, man, my wife is just, she's has to go to the hospital a lot. She's really struggling with this disease that she's facing. And it got me choked up. And I was like, wow, I had no idea. But he totally took ownership of that. Back to Craig's lesson a few weeks ago. He's like, I know I should be doing a better job. I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. And, it's just this personal thing, and I'll get my head back in the game, and I'm sorry. And I was just like totally shocked by all of that. But just that little, check-in, that face-to-face, that FaceTime of knowing what's going on with him and kind of calling him out on it, it made a huge difference in his performance. And I haven't had to have another conversation like that with him since. Not to say that that's always going to be the case. You may have somebody that's just constantly making excuses. But in this situation, it worked well because I just needed to know what was going on with him. And he needed to know, as his leader, that I noticed it and that I was concerned. I needed to redirect him a little bit. Does anybody else have an example or comment about how it's important to know the condition of your flock? Okay.
I'm the one that doesn't do a good job in that.
You don't?
It's come back to bite me many times.
Do you have a story you want to share or not?
Let's see, my whole career. Yeah.
Okay.
It was performance-based only.
Mm.
And didn't recognize that if I had those kind of talks, that it can make a big difference.
Thank you for sharing.
I'll give a small example, but it's not, honestly, it's difficult if you don't really have a lot of flocks. So I think for some of us, we're looking for some flocks to shepherd, so to speak. But I do coach little boys soccer,
Yeah.
so we'll call them one of the flocks. Something I've started doing before every season is bringing the parents to the house to just have that moment, like, what is our goal for this season? And we do talk some technical stuff, but then we get to really the heart. But I find sometimes that I'm learning with some of these young boys, some things I don't know about them. It could be a physical impairment that they may have that I'm unaware of. It could be some mental status, and so sometimes it's so eye-opening when a parent finally decides to share something with you that you did not know.
Mm-hmm.
And you thought you knew them well, but I will say it really gears or changes the way in which I structure their role or what they do. So clearly is very important to know. And I think, and it's also a reminder, it's important to share as well, so that somebody does know, so they can shepherd better. So,
Right.
light example.
Thank you.
Yeah, my example is very similar to that. I coach soccer, so multiple teams, and I have two examples. One would be, there's a time where a kid, he was struggling during a session, and as a coach, there's all sorts of aspects that go into coaching youth sports. And one of those aspects is to get to know them, what they're struggling with. And I found out that he was struggling with an injury, but he was afraid to tell me. And he didn't tell his dad because he was afraid his dad was going to get upset with him. So his dad's kind of wanting to do a little bit better. And so I go and talk to his dad for him and let him know that your son has a little bit of an injury and I'm protecting him. So I got to know him better, and that helped cool that relationship off. That was, you could tell there was tension between it.
Yeah.
The second one, I would be on the learning end of it. I'm telling this kid, this is what we're going to do in this activity, or in a game situation, I need you to do this, and I give him exactly what to do. He doesn't do it. And so I kind of get upset with him, and I pull him off, and I talk to him about it, and get him back in, and he still doesn't get it. A couple weeks go by, and finally his mom pulls me to the side and says, hey, he's struggling with learning. He's a visual learner. He has to see it before he understands it. And so the very next day we had training. I go in there and I call his name and I walk him through exactly what to do. And he was the best at performing that activity.
Wow.
And so there's just getting to know your flock.
Getting to know. Those are great examples. Thank you. Very great. So the next secret is to discover the shape of your sheep. So the condition of your flock and now the shape of your sheep. And the book is, and I can't do this book justice. I mean, it's a small book. I really highly recommend you read it. It doesn't take long to read it. It's really, really good. But he uses an example here of how important it is to choose the right sheep for your flock. If you, and it can make all the difference in the management of that flock. You don't always get to choose everybody who's in your flock. Sometimes, you're going to inherit somebody else's problems, but not all the times. Sometimes you get to pick who your followers are, and by choosing the right sheep for your flock that will help your team, let's say the right team members for your team that will complement each other and that, are the pieces that you need, it'll make all the difference in the world. And the book tells some really neat stories, but I don't really have time to go into all those. So there are some aspects to the SHAPE here. It's an acronym, and it stands for strengths, heart, attitude, personality, and experiences. So when you're getting to know discovering the shape of your sheep, when you have those one-on-one interactions, it's important to know, individually and also as a team, what are their strengths? Where is their heart? What are they passionate about? What is their attitude? What excites them? What do they love to do? And then what is their personality? I have all of my team members, anybody I work with, not just people that are reporting directly to me or my peers, but just anybody that I work with. I have them take this 11-minute personality test, and it's fun. It's just one of those fun ones, but it gives me so much insights to what their personality is. And then I use that all the time as I interact with that person. And I'll talk to other people on the team that they're, John is frustrated with Bob. And John is really frustrated with Bob. Well, they're different personalities, and we all share our personalities with each other. But John, who's frustrated with Bob, he forgot Bob's personality type. Because they're so different. But I'm like, I have to remind John, hey, John, this is Bob's personality type. This is how he's built. This is how he thinks. Just kind of keep that in mind. And it makes all the difference in the world. Like, oh, okay, it's kind of like, when you know something, it gives you a little bit more insight, a little bit more empathy. And then the experiences is the last thing. Know what's going on with them. Know what their experiences are. Whether that's, work-related or, personal things that they've got going on. So does anybody have any questions, comments about the shape of your sheep before we move on? All right, so point number 3 is help your sheep identify with you. It's really important as a shepherd that you build trust with your followers by modeling these 3 things: authenticity, integrity, and compassion. That's important in a company, that's important at home, that's important in a team. That as a leader, you are modeling those things. You have to be authentic in the way that you act. You have to do everything you do with integrity, and you have to treat people with compassion. It's very important. That we should also set high standards for performance, but I'll skip that one because I'm not going to go into it. It says relentlessly communicate your values and your sense of your mission. So we'll get into this more later, but as a shepherd, it's important that you know where you're going and that you keep your flock moving in the direction that you want them to move. So as you do that, it's important that your flock trusts you, that you're visible to them, and that you're communicating constantly what your values are, what your sense of mission is, what you want your flock to be about, that you're communicating that regularly. It drives me nuts when my leadership that I'm following in whatever situation it is, that they keep me in the dark. They don't tell me what's going on. I feel completely lost because, and many times I'm a sheep and I'm following somebody else. And if they're not communicating well with me and I don't know what the vision is, I don't know where we're going, it's disturbing. So along those lines, it's important to define the cause for your people and tell them where they fit in. So once you've defined where you're going, you've set your standards, it's important to let your people know where they fit in and that they're a part of the flock and that they're important and that this is their role and these are these expectations that you have on them. And also, this isn't really written here, but it's important, I think I've said this before, it's very important for people to understand the why. And if people can understand the why, they're a lot more likely to follow you. If you say, okay, we're going to go take this hill over here, using one of Craig's examples, well, why? Well, it's important because if we don't, then everybody behind us is going to die. So that's an example from Extreme Ownership book that Craig was teaching about. And then kind of finally on this point is it's important that we remember that leadership isn't just a professional thing, it's a personal thing. That it's important that we make a personal connection with the people that we lead. That's super important. You know, if I get on a one-on-one call with somebody that works with me and I'm talking with them and it's just all business, then the call goes a lot different. It's so, superficial. It's up here. There's nothing below the surface. If I change that, and at the beginning of the call, I ask them what's going on with them. I ask them, get them kind of talking about, the personal stuff. And I make a personal connection with them. How was your weekend? What did you do? How was your 4th of July? And I went to the lake, or I did this, and we share a little bit. Then it makes a huge difference in the way that they respond to you because they're more comfortable because they know that they can make a personal connection with you. So, has anybody had a situation with an existing leader or been a leader where it's just been superficial and there's no personal relationship and something that, I get some head shakes over here that, yeah, definitely. All right, well, point number 4 is to make your pasture a safe place. So I think I have a quote here from the book. Oh, yes. Okay. So I'm going to read a little bit from this book and this chapter about making your pasture a safe place. Ted, he began, a flock can't be productive. It can't produce the best wool and gain the most weight unless the sheep get the rest and nourishment they need. One of the big reasons those sheep back there look so emancipated is because they are completely exhausted. To give context on that, they went and saw another pasture with some other sheep that wasn't the Good Shepherd sheep. It was another person's sheep, and they were just in really, really, really bad shape. And it was just like disgusting and horrible. And he was saying that the reason that is because they can't get the rest that they need, that they're not taken care of the way that they need to be taken care of. They don't have a safe place. It goes on to say that the flock must be free from fear. So I think that maybe that's why God tells us so many times in the Bible to not be afraid, to cast out fear, is because if He is the great shepherd, and then He knows that when we're fearful, we're not as productive, we're not as useful, we're not as helpful as we should be to Him in His kingdom. So He wants us to remove fear from our lives. And we should do that for our people too, for the people that are following us, that we are shepherding. So along those lines, here's some points that were given throughout the chapter of how to do that. Like the practical application is to, we talked a little bit about this already, is to keep your people well informed. So to kind of expand on that, rather than just communicating values and stuff, it's to let them know what's going on in the environment, to protect them in a way, but also if there is some talk at the water cooler that layoffs may be happening, it's important that they hear it from you rather than from somebody at the water cooler. It's important that people know what's going on. If that's not an issue, but it's a rumor that you've heard, then you need to nip that in the bud and say, hey, this is something that I've heard. This is not the case. I want you guys to be informed about what's going on so that they feel safe, so that they feel like you're taking care of them. it says to infuse every position with importance. That's all about encouraging people, making people feel like they're valued, making people feel like they're important. Every sheep has value, and we should communicate that value to them and infuse them with that value. The other thing here it says is to cull chronic instigators from the flock. So he tells a neat story about when, sheep will fight other sheep within the flock. And that can go on to kind of establish rank and societal stuff to some degree. But if the shepherd doesn't take care of that and make sure that it doesn't get out of hand, then it could go south really fast. And he tells a story about this one sheep that just kept on causing problems. And he had to discipline that sheep. And then finally, because the sheep just was causing so much problem for the rest of the flock, he had to get rid of the sheep. So the guy was like, well, what did you do? He's like, well, I had some good lamb chops. So I'm not suggesting that we eat the people that are problems. I'm not suggesting that at all. But it's a story about sheep, of course. The other thing it says is to regularly rotate the sheep to fresh pastures. And I think that goes really well with work. If they're keep them fresh, keep them moving along, keep them engaged in different things. So they don't just, because what sheep do is they'll just eat the grass until there's nothing left, and they'll just keep going. And then if they're not moved to fresh pasture where there's fresh grass, then they'll starve to death. So it's your job to find them fresh work, to find them fresh grass so that they can stay healthy. To reassure the sheep by staying visible. All right, show of hands, how many people have ever had a boss that just disappears and they've never seen, and just where did he go? Who I never talk to him, I never see him. I think he's my boss, but maybe I talk to him a couple times a year. You don't want to be that guy. You want to stay visible to your people, be accessible. And one of the stories here, one of the things that I've heard said about this is you can't just say, well, my door is open anytime. Because they may be fearful of you. They may not really trust you, and they're not going to come in your door. You say, oh, come on in, my door is open anytime. You can't just do that. You have to go to them. You have to show them love. So, and then it says, don't give problems time to fester. So that goes back to my story about my guy at the beginning that I shared. When I was talking with him, I let that fester too long. I didn't go take care of it soon enough. And luckily it didn't get too bad because it went well in that situation, but it could have been a lot worse. So, when something, I was reading a job description recently, and one of the things that it said, it was for a manager position, one of the things it said is to address things early, tease out concerns early. And I was like, man, that's a great way to think about it. You work with your people early and you tease out those concerns. You deal with those things quickly rather than later, rather than giving them time to fester and get infected. And now it's spread to other sheep. I'm going to back up for a minute. One thing I didn't cover in regards to attitude, and I don't know that this is necessarily goes along with this, but I think it goes along with leadership, is attitudes is very infectious. If it's a good attitude and you're spreading a good attitude and you have a good attitude, it will be infectious and everybody else will have a good attitude. If you've got people who have a really bad attitude, you've got to address that. if you have a bad attitude, it's going to be picked up on. It's very contagious. Attitude is super duper contagious. So just keep that in mind. That's something that I've had to work on personally because, you know, I'm a human. I get disappointed with things, and I got to be careful not to get all sour and then share that with my team and share that sourness, because next thing I know, they're all sour. And then I'm like, why is everybody sour? Oh, yeah, it was me. It's my fault. So a little bit about attitude there. So point number 5 is the staff of direction. So shepherd staff. So know where you're going. Get out in front and keep your flock on the move. When you're directing, to use persuasion rather than coercion. So it talks about how the staff is used for direction and correction. You know, you can tap the sheep and, you know, get it to go in the right direction, and you can save the sheep. And then if you've got a sheep that is hurt, you can use the staff to caress them and make them pull them closer to you, to let them know that everything's okay. And that goes into when we're leading people too. When somebody's hurt, it's all right to, you know, use that leadership skill and pull them closer to you and let them know that everything's going to be okay. I think I have a quote here from the book for this. Yes, I do. All right. So in regards to the staff of direction, yes, okay, so I already said this. Using the staff to gently nudge the lead sheep in the direction the shepherd wants to go. So I thought it was interesting, the choice of words that he used here is to nudge the lead sheep. So the shepherd leads differently, you know, than like a cattle herder. You know, a cattle herder will like, "Hurrah," you know, and push them, and it's just they respond different. But the shepherd doesn't necessarily. What's interesting about this scenario is the picture on the book shows people and then a person out in front, like walking out in front of them. But sheep don't necessarily do that. You see videos or you hear things about how, yeah, this sheep will follow. Well, that's true to a degree, but at the same time, they really kind of follow the lead sheep. So if you want to direct the sheep where you want them to go, you get the lead sheep out there and you kind of nudge them along in the direction that you want them to go. So it's important to develop leadership within your team and to have that relationship with that lead sheep, that lead person, that you can nudge along to help them go in the right direction. I closed my book by mistake. I shouldn't have done that. Let's have more quotes. Okay. Instead of making pronouncements, make requests. So this is a way that we can use that staff of direction to direct people rather than coerce them, is to, rather than say, this is the way it's going to be, make a request. Say, hey, do it this way. Can we do it this way? It makes them feel like they have more freedom. And it's important that they feel like they have freedom. Because a quote from the book here is that you don't want them to feel incarcerated. So, I don't know if you guys have ever been in a situation where you've been in a job where you just feel like you're so restricted in what you're allowed to do, what you can do, and how things work, that you almost feel like you're incarcerated. It's not a good feeling. So it's important with sheep not to bridle them like you would a horse. You know, you ride a horse and you bridle the horse, but you don't ride sheep. So you've got to let your sheep be free. But it is important for your sheep to know where the fences are, where the boundaries are, where they can be safe, and to point that out to them so they don't wander beyond that border so they don't get tangled in the fence. And then when they do get tangled in the fence or in the briars or whatever, it's very important that we use that leadership ability of the staff to go and get them. There's a story in the Bible where the shepherd leaves the other 99 sheep to go after the one sheep that's lost. And that's the way of the shepherd, is they go after that one sheep and they rescue that sheep and they bring that sheep back to the flock. And then this guy gives an example too. He said that he had a sheep that wandered off and got hurt, and he made a point to make sure that that sheep was close to him for the next several days to make them feel more comfortable. And I couldn't find it, but I'm going to do my best to retell this story that I did read in the book. There was a story in here about a sheep that kept wandering off constantly, and he continued to have to go rescue it. And he would use the rod. I mean, he would use the staff a little bit to, whack it and say, hey, don't do that sort of thing, to try to teach it. And it was just stubborn. It wouldn't learn. So he'd have to go rescue it over and over and over again. And it was creating a problem for the other sheep because more and more of them were wandering off too. And it was putting the other sheep in danger because he would have to leave the flock to go rescue this sheep. So it was taking his time away from protecting the rest of the sheep. And I couldn't believe the story, but and I'm not even sure 100% how it's going to apply towards people, but he, because I couldn't find it and get used the actual example, but finally when he rescued the sheep, he broke the sheep's leg the last time, and it couldn't wander off anymore. But what he did is the next 3 days he carried the sheep. So he let the sheep know, hey, you can't do this anymore. And he carried that sheep around for 3 days, keeping it really close, comforting it. And then when it could walk again, it would hobble. And he put the sheep down, and the sheep never wandered off again. So I'm not exactly sure how that would apply. You like that?
I think that's got possibility.
That's got possibilities. Okay. Yes, Dale.
20 years ago, Lynn Anderson out of Dallas wrote a book called They Smell Like Sheep. And I've heard that story
Okay.
about the breaking of the leg of a wandering lamb. And the point is that's what God does in our brokenness.
Mm-hmm.
Is he carries us, and we then learn to depend on him rather than ourselves. And so the point, I guess you could with an employee kind of, is that a performance review with with an improvement plan or double secret probation? But the applicable thing about having the sheep's leg broke is how in our brokenness God carries us.
Yeah. And I like the part about how the carrying part, after you discipline the sheep, you keep it close so that it's dependent upon you. And, it is important throughout this whole thing that we realize that the Lord is our shepherd and that he is the ultimate shepherd that takes care of us and that we need to follow him, and he takes care of us, and we use his example in how we shepherd other people.
Maybe time for lamb chop again, too.
I guess if you got to go there, yeah. So I'm nearly out of time, but I'm going to keep going. I won't get offended if you have to get up and get your kids or something. So in addition to that, when they are in trouble, you need to go get them out. So he gives another example in the book of a business example where this guy got onto one of his employees from a different department, and he got in her face and he was yelling at her and profanities, and he just came in and stood between the guy and the gal, and he was yelling at him, and it wasn't good. He's still yelling, and he said, "Hey, you need to come to my office." And he took him to his office, and he stood in the gap there to protect his person. And he got in the way of trouble, and that's what we're supposed to do. And I think that actually goes to the next point. The rod of correction is that, it's our job to protect, that we need to stand in the gap, and we need to stand between trouble and our people and take that responsibility. And then and we'll just move on because I'm running out of time. The rod of correction. So the rod is a different tool than this staff. I don't have a rod yet. That'll be something I hope to get in the future. So the rod is interesting. It's carved out of a bulb of usually like an oak tree. And it's just a huge sort of club with a stick off at the end, and the stick is the root. So the shepherds, they'll dig these out themselves and craft them. It's a weapon. And in the book, he gives some great examples of how shepherds use this. In modern day times, we use rifles. But, a good shepherd can use a rod, almost like a rifle. And he's with this guy in the field, and he shows him this rod, and, he handles it, and he gives him back to the shepherd, and the shepherd goes, "Okay, watch this." And he just throws it up in the air, and it arcs, and he couldn't believe how far it flew. I mean, it was just clear across the pasture on the other side. And he goes on to say how some of the shepherds, like in Africa and whatnot, they in Ireland, they can use these rods with like pinpoint precision, and they can just throw it and just destroy something, a lion or a bear or what, I don't know, but to protect the sheep. And sometimes you have to use that rod to, of course, protect your sheep, but you also sometimes have to use that rod to knock your sheep, to let them know that, hey, this is discipline. Going back to the discipline thing that we've been talking about, that it's the hardest thing for new leaders to learn is how to discipline. It's often avoided, and when that happens, it causes more and more problems, and those problems fester and infect, and attitudes get sour, and then attitude gets contagious, and it gets worse. And so it's very important to use that rod when you have to.
In Africa and Maasai, it's called the Novkiri.
I'm glad you could pronounce that, because
Novkiri.
okay.
It is a mean-looking instrument. At the end of it, they fashion it so that the end has a point on it.
Oh.
I pulled one up here. And I've wondered about that in Psalm 23, thy rod and thy staff. So it's referring to two different things.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, because this is the staff and that is the rod, the knob carry that you were talking about. Very different instruments. So that's your homework. You can look up the knob carry, look up the rod. So then I'll cover the last point, and we can go on. The last thing is the heart. And we've talked about this in here before, is that it's very important that the heart of the shepherd is the most important leadership principle as a shepherd. It is your heart. That great leadership, and it's a lifestyle. It's not just a technique. It's not just 7 steps. It's not just 12 great things. It starts with your heart. It stays with your heart. It ends with your heart. It's all about your heart. It's just very important that our heart is in the right place, and that we show people that we lead that we love them. I think it's weird, but I still do it. Sometimes I actually tell the people that I lead at work that I love them. And I still feel weird about it sometimes because it's a professional, relationship. It's not, like at church where that's brotherly love. But I do say that sometimes. And I feel weird doing it. Maybe one day I won't. But it's important that your people know that you love them. And you should do that with your actions, not just with your words. Because if you just talk the talk and not walk the walk, then, it's going to show. So that's all I have. That's not true. Don Milliken sent me a text, and he asked me, because he's not here, what were the questions for the small groups? So I had to come up with questions today, because Don asked me to. Okay, so question number 1, you guys can write this down. Anybody need a pen? All right. Question number 1. Other than God, tell the group, your small group, about a good shepherd-like leader that you have followed. Okay? So in your small group, tell the group about a good shepherd that you have followed. Okay? Question number 2. Which of the 7 secrets that we covered tonight do you struggle with the most when leading others? Which of the 7 secrets do you struggle with the most when you're leading other people? And why? Why do you struggle with that? That'll get some good group conversation going about this. So thank you guys for listening tonight. Next week we'll have Todd Watson teaching. And then, Lord willing, we'll have Mitch the next 2 weeks. And thank you guys. You're dismissed.
Do you need the extra handouts from tonight?
There's some in this chair right over here.